What's good, YouTube? God, man. Whenever it gets cold, we wear hoodies, right? Even though we could just get a puffer jacket or a ski coat, we decide that the style of a hoodie looks much more preferable as a society. This phenomenon is known as groupthink. It is a phenomenon where a group of people or society makes a normal decision to harmonize an aspect of life at the cost of rationality. But that's a topic for another day. I want to talk to you about the first syllable of the word hoodie. Hood. I know for some of you, you may have shifted in your seats a little bit, but I believe the miscategorization of African American hoods are something that is extremely misunderstood. I bet if I asked someone on the street if they knew the origin of the hood or the word, that they would be absolutely clueless and could not give an answer. So, let's find the answer to that question. First, we need to know how this word originated. For the word hood, it originated from the word being used by a black Chicago gang called the Blackstone Rangers in the 1960s. Although this is an answer to the word, I believe it doesn't exactly answer the question thoroughly. But the association of the word to crime, sodomy, lack of organization, drug use, and poverty originates way farther back than that. You see, the migration of African Americans after the Harlem Renaissance can be to blame for these issues. During the Harlem Renaissance, African Americans empowered other African Americans all over cities across the country. It brought understanding of displaying the strength and richness of the world through black literature and art. But we know now what hit next. It was the unfortunate Great Depression. The blame was placed partly on those African Americans involved in the Renaissance, as that marked the end of it all. But why does this matter? This happened almost hundreds of years ago, you may be asking. You see, the reason for the importance of this is what happened after. African Americans all over the country looked to migrate to African American communities that were instituted even before the effects of segregation. Now, these communities lacked wealth and capacity due to the fact that businesses that were successfully being invested in and run were unfortunately owned by whites. You see, that's not a problem, but they were only owned by whites. So, the institutions, educations, and national economy of America were not willing to invest in black startups or black economies because of the fact that these economies were just recently made and the companies have not even begun to centralize around investments or have any customers. You see, to those that are unfamiliar with business practices, to begin a business, you need to have investors invest money into your company. You see, in these times there was no Zoom, so pitches were always in person and required investors to see what the owners and representatives looked like. Because of the way that African American neighborhoods were new for every aspect of the US economy, no one wanted them as entrepreneurs or employees. So, African Americans were not even wanted in white-owned companies. So now what? If there's no way to be entrepreneurs or employees, then how is this large community going to proceed? Well, unfortunately, the wrong person had the answer to that question. Now, before 1969, African American communities were starting to create their own mini ecosystem of small businesses, kept a strong moral code and compass, and created a community that was united, while attempting to give the children of the community a chance at education. A big example of this is the Little Rock Nine. In 1957, being one of the first pushes of integration in the South. But even with all of this, the African American communities were still in dire need of money. Now let's go back to our question and find out who answered it. The person that decided the fate of African American communities around the country was President Richard Nixon. A quote from his domestic policy chief explains the mindset of the administration perfectly. He stated, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Lastly," he states, "we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." This brought about the second cultural change of African Americans as a mass. Because of the association, African Americans were encouraged to take on this reputation. We now know, though, from a San Jose Mercury article, that during the Cold War around 1996, the CIA was directly involved in drug trafficking and distribution of narcotics. It was directly linked to the widespread use of drugs and destruction in cities like LA, Chicago, and New York, where the strongest black communities are. Now, the introduction of gangster African American culture with gangs and music genres like rap and R&B being introduced, the life of an African American could go two ways. Now, most African Americans in those communities could choose a life of drugs, crime, skipping education, and pursuing the unlikely rap career, or choose the lame life of an educated and an individual with plenty of opportunities. This is what the culture of Black communities has brought us to. This leads us to today, where this problem is more evident than ever. Cultural differences, social norms, and exclusion most often push people to make the wrong decisions in the long run, a perfect formula for failure. Well, now that we understand these things, and the situation has gotten to the climax, how do we fix it? First, we need to take another look at the word. We see that the word hood is now something that African Americans in these neighborhoods take very strong pride in. So, detaching the word from the community will only cause more outward hate from the individuals that find this hood to be their community. I believe that there are only three options for the success of the hood. The first solution requires taking advantage of the mini ecosystem of the hood and the willingness to buy from others of the same community. If this mini economy is utilized and companies become bigger and bigger, reliance on white companies will not be needed. Instead, African American companies can be the new leaders of imports and exports, dictating the pace of the economy nationally. And because of how widespread African American communities are, this would be a large benefit to America as well. The second solution comes from the innovation and advancements of civil rights being taken advantage of correctly. As one of my brothers said, money is blind. This means that even the most racist investor or customer would still invest or buy if the company is innovative and creative enough and if the prices are low enough. Although people are still racist in this day and age, there are a lot more opportunities for Black African American communities with the current support of BLM and civil rights reignitions. In the last solution is taking advantage of the cultural influence that Black culture has on the world. You see, creation and influence of Black music has taken the world by storm from the start of the new millennia on. So, why aren't there more record labels that are hosted or supported by an African American community, museums for Black culture, and the partnership between African American music and arts? Lastly, we need to understand that variety is not a pick and choose. Variety is a culmination of different cultures and different aspects of life, as well as the way that people represent that. And I believe that in that representation, we should learn from one another's cultures, but not only that, the way they're represented. Because as a Black race, we can take from the economic strength of white companies and white folk. And I think the same thing can be done to our artistic abilities as a Black race. And I think that the undermining of the opposite culture or the opposite race is something that needs to be eradicated completely. This is why I think the world needs to have some of both. The world needs white culture and it also needs Black culture. This isn't an ideal world, but unfortunately, we don't live in one. So, I hope that the two worlds of whites and Blacks can reconcile in the future in the strongest possible way. But that's just a hope. Well, I hope I didn't ruin your day. Caleb, out.